You have to understand that our connection had stopped being a family relationship years ago. It was a transaction, and I was the ATM that never got reimbursed. The record of their exploitation was extensive, and every line item was written in permanent marker. I remember precisely the moment I understood my function. I was 17. I had worked 3 part-time jobs throughout junior year to save enough for a used Toyota Corolla. I was proud of that vehicle. It represented independence. It represented escape from the household where I felt non-existent. But 4 weeks after purchasing it, my younger sister, Brooke, who was 19 and had recently lost her driving privileges for reckless driving, took my keys without permission. She didn't even make it past our neighborhood. She totaled my Toyota by hitting a fire hydrant because she was filming a video for social media while operating the vehicle. When I arrived home to the flashing lights of emergency services, I anticipated my parents would be furious with her. Instead, my mother was consoling Brooke, who was sobbing about how the incident had damaged her phone right before an important photo opportunity. My father pulled me aside privately. He didn't inquire about my well-being. He didn't offer to replace my vehicle. He informed me that filing an insurance claim would increase their premium rates exponentially. He stated that since it was registered under my name, it was technically my financial burden. I ended up covering the fire hydrant repairs and the towing expenses from my scholarship fund. They framed it as a valuable lesson in accountability for me, while Brooke received a brand new leased vehicle 2 months later because she required reliable transportation for her social media career. That was the established pattern. I absorbed the consequences, Brooke received the rewards. It repeated during my university commencement ceremony. I crossed the stage, scanning the audience for Daniel and Susan. I had provided them the date 6 months in advance. I had reserved their seats, but the chairs remained empty. Later, I received a text from my father. Brooke had an emergency. Emergency translated to she'd experienced a minor setback and was having a breakdown before a local modeling audition. They had reversed direction on the interstate to comfort her. I consumed dinner alone that evening in my graduation cap and gown, comprehending that to them, my achievements were interruptions, while Brooke's minor inconveniences were catastrophic crises. So, when they returned from their Maldives vacation 3 weeks after missing my wedding ceremony, I wasn't surprised they didn't contact me to apologize. I discovered through mutual acquaintances, social media functions like a surveillance network, that the trip hadn't proceeded as anticipated. The major brand partnership Brooke had publicized extensively, it collapsed. The corporation withdrew at the final moment because her follower engagement metrics were declining. That meant Daniel and Susan were financially responsible for the business class flights, the overwater villa, the private excursions. They had charged everything to credit accounts, gambling on the sponsorship payment to clear the balance. Now they were back in Atlanta, sun-tanned, financially depleted, and desperate. They required immediate liquidity, and in the corporate hierarchy of our dysfunctional family structure, when the primary asset is failing, you liquidate the backup resources. That was me. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an emergency fund, and they were prepared to cash out. The phone call came on a Wednesday afternoon. It was Daniel. I activated speaker mode so Marcus could listen. I anticipated a guilt manipulation about blocking them on Instagram. I anticipated them to perform victimhood. But my father's tone was professional, business-oriented. The voice he employed when attempting to close a transaction he understood was questionable. "Rachel, we need to discuss equity," he stated. He didn't reference the wedding, he didn't acknowledge the vacant seats, he proceeded directly to financial figures. He informed me that he and Susan had been conducting a comprehensive financial review of the previous decade. He said that raising 2 daughters was financially burdensome, and, upon examining their documentation, they believed there existed a significant disparity in how their resources had been distributed. I nearly laughed. I assumed he was finally admitting they had invested everything in Brooke. But then he pivoted strategically. He said, We have calculated the expenses of your upbringing that exceeded the standard parental obligations, the orthodontics, the vehicle maintenance, the housing costs during your internship year. It totals $52,300. Since Brooke is currently experiencing a career transition and you are established professionally, we expect you to reimburse the family account for that amount." The room became silent. The ceiling fan hummed, sounding deafening in the quiet. $52,300. It was a precise figure. It wasn't a rounded number invented spontaneously. It sounded deliberately calculated. I felt rage rising in my chest, the impulse to scream, to enumerate every instance I had financed my own life, every time I had rescued them financially. But Marcus reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His grip was firm. He shook his head, signaling me to remain silent. Marcus is a forensic financial analyst. He manages fraud investigations, embezzlement cases, and corporate deception professionally. He doesn't react emotionally. He becomes analytical. I inhaled deeply and asked, "You want me to compensate you for raising me?" "Consider it a retroactive childcare reimbursement," Daniel said, as smooth as polished marble. "We are prepared to establish a structured payment arrangement if you cannot manage the complete sum immediately, but we require the initial payment by Friday morning." I disconnected without confirming or declining. I just sat there, staring at the device, feeling violated. Marcus broke the silence. He didn't appear shocked, he appeared like he was solving a complex equation.
"This is the sunk cost fallacy, Rachel," he said, his voice calm and analytical. I looked at him confused. He explained, "In economic theory, a sunk cost is capital you have already expended and cannot recover. Rational investors terminate losses, but desperate investors, they continue investing in the failing asset, hoping for reversal. Your parents have invested everything, their money, their reputation, their identity into Brooke. She is their declining stock. She is collapsing and dragging them down simultaneously." He indicated the phone. "They recognize you are stable. You are the high-performing investment they ignored. Now that they are hemorrhaging cash, they are attempting to liquidate you to sustain her. They don't believe they owe you an apology because in their perception, you are property. You are simply an asset to be sold, covering their bad investment." He stood and walked to his home office, cracking his knuckles. "But $52,300 is an extremely specific figure," he said, turning back to me with an expression I hadn't witnessed before, a predator's expression. "People like your father typically round to $50,000 or $55,000. The fact that it is that precise means it corresponds to an actual obligation. They aren't requesting reimbursement, Rachel. They are demanding you pay off a specific debt, and I am going to discover exactly what it is." My initial impulse was to incinerate the relationship with a barrage of angry messages. I wanted to scream at my father to list every instance I had purchased my own textbooks, my own clothing, my own existence. I wanted to remind him that I was on a comprehensive academic scholarship during the years he claimed to be supporting me financially. But Marcus stopped me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch grounding. "Do not become emotional," he said, his voice steady. "Acquire the documentation. Anger is merely noise to people like them. Evidence is power." We sent a straightforward email response. No emotion, no defensive arguments, just one sentence. "Please provide an itemized breakdown of the expenses totaling $52,300 so we can review the claim." They sent it within 90 minutes. That was the first warning sign. It was too prepared. It was a spreadsheet attached to an email with the subject line, "Family Financial Obligations." Marcus sat at his desk, dual monitors illuminating the dim room. He cracked his neck and commenced work. I sat in the chair behind him, observing him dissect my existence. He didn't examine it like a husband. He examined it like an investigator. He cross-referenced dates. He accessed archived bank statements I maintained in cloud storage. "This is amateurish," he muttered, indicating the screen. "Examine this entry. They listed $5,200 for housing expenses in October 2016. I squinted at the date. I was a junior. I was residing in university housing as a student mentor. My accommodations were complimentary. I didn't cost them anything that semester." Marcus continued scrolling. "And here, medical expenses 2017. You were on your own healthcare plan through your campus employment by then." He rotated his chair to face me. "Rachel, these aren't reimbursements. The dates don't correspond with your life, but they do match something else." He displayed a window on the secondary screen. It was Brooke's archived Instagram profile. He had scrolled back years. "October 2016, he said, indicating a photograph of Brooke posing with designer luggage in Milan. "Medical expenses 2017? That corresponds with the week Brooke posted about cosmetic procedures before her first pageant competition." The realization struck me like ice water. They weren't asking me to compensate them for raising me. They were demanding I retroactively finance Brooke's luxury lifestyle. They had preserved the receipts for her extravagant existence and were now attempting to bill them to my account. But then Marcus stopped. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. His expression hardened. "Wait," he said. "The total, $52,300. It is too precise to be merely a random accumulation of Brooke's expenses. Why that specific number?" He opened a new browser tab. "I am going to access your complete credit history, Rachel, not the consumer report you view on banking applications, the comprehensive investigation, the one that reveals everything attached to your social security number since birth." The room was silent for 4 minutes. The only sound was the clicking of his mouse. Then he stopped. He released a long, controlled breath. "They didn't just bill you, Rachel. They stole your identity." He rotated the screen toward me. There, listed in digital black and white, were 4 credit cards I had never seen. One opened when I was 16, 3 additional ones when I was 18. All of them maxed out to their limits, all of them currently in default status and accumulating substantial interest penalties. The total outstanding balance, $52,314. Daniel and Susan hadn't just requested a loan, they had committed federal identity theft. They had utilized my minor social security number to finance Brooke's early career, maxed out the accounts, and ignored them until collection agencies initiated contact. Now that they were financially devastated from the Maldives trip, they couldn't maintain the minimum payments anymore. They needed me to pay the reimbursement so they could settle the fraud they committed in my name before I discovered it. I stared at the screen. The betrayal wasn't emotional anymore, it was criminal.
We invited them the following evening. I informed them we had the payment ready. Marcus coached me for 90 minutes before they arrived. He introduced me to a psychological strategy called the gray rock technique. He explained that narcissistic personalities feed on reaction. If I screamed, I provided them fuel. If I cried, I provided them satisfaction. To prevail, I had to become a gray rock, boring, unyielding, and completely impenetrable. I had to remove the emotional vulnerability so they had nothing to manipulate. When the doorbell rang, my heart pounded against my ribs, but my face was an expressionless mask. I opened the door. Daniel and Susan stood there, appearing smug. Brooke was with them, scrolling on her phone, appearing bored, as if extorting her sister was routine Tuesday business. "We are pleased you came to reason, Rachel," Daniel said, walking past me without waiting for invitation. "Family supports family. It is the honorable action." They sat at our dining table. Susan looked around at our home, her eyes evaluating the furnishings, calculating their value. I sat opposite them. Marcus stood behind me, a silent guardian. I didn't offer them refreshments. I didn't inquire about their well-being. I just folded my hands on the table. "Did you bring the payment?" Brooke asked, finally looking up. I have a photographer waiting on a booking deposit. I looked at her. I didn't feel the familiar sting of inadequacy. I didn't feel the urge to accommodate. I felt nothing. There is no payment, I said. My voice was flat, monotone. Daniel's face reddened instantly. You stated you had the funds. Do not play manipulative games with us, Rachel. We have legal recourse we can pursue if you refuse to pay your obligations. That was the moment he threatened legal action. He walked directly into the trap. I reached under the table and extracted a thick manila folder. I slid it across the wooden surface. It stopped directly in front of my father's hands. We have legal recourse too, I said. Daniel frowned, confused. He opened the folder. It wasn't a payment check. It was a sworn fraud affidavit prepared by a notary that morning. Behind it was a draft police report for identity theft naming Daniel, Susan, and Brooke as co-conspirators. And behind that, the complete credit report Marcus had pulled with the fraudulent dates highlighted in fluorescent yellow. The color drained from Daniel's face. It happened instantaneously, like someone severed a connection. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. This is a misunderstanding, he stammered. We managed your finances when you were a minor. This was for your benefit. I didn't blink. I stayed in the gray rock state. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just stated the facts. You opened credit lines in a minor's name, I said. You maxed them out on luxury goods for Brooke. That is a federal crime. It carries a prison sentence of up to 18 years. Susan snatched the papers from him. Her hands began shaking as she read. She looked at me, tears instantly appearing in her eyes, her default defense mechanism. Rachel, please, she wailed. We were drowning financially. We just needed temporary assistance. How could you do this to your own parents? We are family. I watched her cry. It was a performance I had witnessed countless times, but the audience had permanently departed. I stood up. Marcus stepped forward, crossing his arms. You have 24 hours, I said. You will liquidate whatever assets you have remaining, the vacation property, the luxury vehicle lease, I don't care. You will pay off every cent of those accounts. If the balance isn't zero by tomorrow at 6 p.m., I file the report. Daniel stood, attempting to regain his height, his authority. You wouldn't put your sister in prison. You wouldn't destroy this family over money. I looked him directly in the eye. You destroyed the family when you chose to steal from one daughter to worship the other. And as for the money, I paused, letting the silence extend until it was unbearable. It was never about money. It was about worth. I pointed to the door. Leave. They didn't argue. They saw the expression on Marcus's face. They saw the phone in his hand ready to dial. They scrambled out of the house like insects when lights activate. When the door clicked shut, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with justice. They made the deadline barely. At 5:47 p.m. the next day, Marcus's phone notified. He refreshed the credit report. The balances on all 4 fraudulent accounts had dropped to 0, paid in full. I didn't experience a surge of euphoria. I just felt the substantial weight of a burden finally being released. It was a transaction concluded, a contract terminated. The fallout in Atlanta, however, was much messier than a simple financial transfer. You cannot liquidate a lifestyle in 24 hours without people observing. To generate nearly $53,000 in cash overnight, Daniel and Susan had to sell everything that provided them their social identity. The vacation timeshare they used to impress associates sold to a liquidation company for cash well below market value. The country club membership they had maintained for 25 years resigned and cashed out. In a community like ours, status is the only currency that matters, and they had just declared social bankruptcy. The rumors initiated immediately. People whispered that Daniel was under federal investigation, that they were destitute, that they had been caught in a scheme. The invitations to charity events stopped arriving. The phone calls evaporated. They were left isolated in their oversized house, surrounded by the echoes of the image they couldn't afford to maintain. But the final blow didn't come from the neighbors. It came from the monster they had created. 5 days after the confrontation, Brooke posted a video. I watched it from an anonymous account. She wasn't crying about her failed brand partnership anymore. She was sitting in her bedroom, ring light activated, looking somber. The title was "Breaking My Silence: Surviving Financially Abusive Parents." She threw them to the wolves to salvage her own brand, to explain why she wasn't living the luxury life anymore. She painted herself as the victim of their financial mismanagement. She claimed she had severed ties with them for her own mental health. She didn't mention the fraud. She didn't mention that she was the one who spent the money. She simply realized that the bank of mom and dad was closed, so she incinerated the bank to generate sympathy engagement. It was poetic justice. They had sacrificed their relationship with me to worship her, and ultimately she cannibalized them for content. I closed the laptop and never viewed her page again. 1 year later, the atmosphere in my garden is different. It doesn't feel suffocating anymore. It feels abundant. I stood on the back patio this morning holding a coffee mug, watching Marcus kneel in the soil. He was marking out a new section of the yard. We aren't just planting roses this season, we are clearing space for playground equipment. I looked down at the blueprints on the table. It wasn't a landscape design, it was a plan for a nursery room. For an extended period, I was afraid to start a family. I was terrified that the toxicity in my DNA was inevitable, that I would inherit their coldness, their transactional view of love. But observing Marcus, observing the life we constructed brick by brick, I realized something fundamental. Biology is an accident. Biology is just shared genetic material. But family is architecture. You choose the location, you pour the foundation, you select the materials, you decide who receives a key to the front entrance, and more importantly, you decide who remains outside the gate. I am not an invisible child anymore. I am solid, I am seen, and the family I am building now won't have to audit their worth to know they are loved. They will know it because I will show up. I will be in the front row, and I will never, ever look through them to see someone else. If you have ever felt like the invisible one in your family, or if you have had to make the difficult choice to sever ties to preserve your own sanity, I want you to know you aren't alone. It is okay to choose yourself. It is okay to close the account. Drop a comment below and tell me your story. Let's remind each other that we are the architects of our own peace.